Hello, and welcome to week 14 of 15 in Psychology of Personality. Just 2 weeks left. Grab it by the horns and make it through these 2 weeks, just 2 more weeks. I hope you had a great break from school or a break from this class maybe, or maybe you're working on your final papers or whatever. I hope you had some nice relaxing time to recharge your batteries and make the best out of these 2 weeks. So we're going to spend this week looking at a couple chapters, chapters 17 and 18, that focus really on learning theory. Back in my game, I've been spent the last couple weeks here a little out of my element here. This is actually kind of where I'm a lot more comfortable, is talking about learning theory. Essentially, learning theory is a couple things. Where first we're going to talk about, basically operant conditioning, rewards and punishments for basically that shape us into the person that we are. So very much focus on environmental factors that impact us and create who we are. And in chapter 18, we look at social learning theory, which is arguably still based on rewards and punishments for behavior, but it takes into consideration important people in our lives that we observe, or people that we encounter, or important experiences that we have that shape our behavior and who we are. And it's a behavioral theory because, according to Bandura, the developer of this, and I'm certainly getting way ahead of myself here, the developer of social learning theory, not only do you have to be able to see the role model and imitate them, but there has to be some sort of reinforcing mechanism. Keep in mind, however, that reinforcing mechanism may not be from that person. So we can have a role model who's a famous individual, and they don't know what we're doing, but we have friends that reinforce us, or we have internal mechanisms of reinforcement. We use that looking glass self and we say, I am acting in a way that I feel this individual would approve of. Built-in reinforcement mechanism there. But these researchers really focus on the idea in social learning theory that we have role models, we imitate them, and then some sort of mechanism for reinforcing that. Without that reinforcement, it wouldn't happen. And that's why we don't necessarily always see that that effect of video games and people and violence. That's not as clear-cut a connection there, because the society still doesn't want you to go around shooting people, even though that's the role in the video game. So, back up. Chapter 17, taking a look at learning theory and personality development here. I start with a discussion of basically a book that was written by B.F. Skinner, the founder of behaviorism, called Walden 2. Walden 1 refers to Ralph Waldo Emerson's book, I believe, the poetry, Walden, which is a beautiful New England area. Walden 2 was a utopian society based on behavioral principles, and they still somewhat exist. I'm not really sure if this one is really flying as it matters, but those kinds of commune areas and stuff, there was an attempt at creating a Walden 2. So here we have an introduction to this guy, B.F. Skinner, who was a researcher at Harvard. He was into very radical behaviorism. He basically felt that the environment created who we are. One of his famous lines is that he could give him 4 children and he'll create a thief, a murderer, a scientist, and a philosopher. He'll just, if he could shape everything in their environment, he could actually shape them to what he wanted them to be. Those of us with a little bit of a humanist perspective in psychology feel that, where's the free will in all this, and that's basically one of those big conflicts that came out in the world of psychology, is where's free will? So you had Freud's idea that we are subject to the will of the id, and this battle between our ego and superego over the forces of the id. kind of out of our control and not even in our consciousness. And then you have B.F. Skinner coming along and said, no, it's not even in your head. It's outside, just shaping who you are. And humanist psychology arose out of that, saying, wait a minute, I make choices. Maybe these are all real. Maybe, there are forces outside that shape who I am, but I'm also an agent in that. And so you see that kind of progression of ideas. But as long as we're talking about B.F. Skinner, pretty straightforward. The environment determines who you are and how you act. And that's kind of the lens that we're looking at personality through right now. So here we have operant conditioning, basically the theory that it operates on what is called the law of effect, and probably the only law that you're going to see within the field of psychology. All kinds of laws in physics, but not a lot of laws in psychology. And the law of effect is that a behavior is more likely to occur again and repeat occurring if immediately following that behavior is a positive stimulus. It is less likely to occur if immediate following that is a negative stimulus. And whether something's positive or negative is really up to the person that's there. What one of us might think is positive might not be very positive to them. I'll tell you a really quick story about that. When my daughter, Hannah, was in grade school, they had a summer project of reading the most, quote unquote, chapter books. My daughter's is an incredible reader and loved to read. She went to the library getting books all summer, and she submitted her logbook, and she didn't win. And not that we need to have our daughter, winning everything, but we thought it was curious. We thought she did an awful lot of books. And when we went to the first ceremony, we found out that the person who won had read like 40 chapter books, and kind of looked at each other and said, Hannah did a lot more than 40, so what's going on? So the teacher wanted to talk to us after and came, we met with her, and she goes, by the way, Hannah read the most books. And we're like, okay, so what's going on? Said, well, the prize is that the class is going to go down to see the Sea Dogs play, and whoever read the most books is going to get to throw out the first pitch. And my daughter wasn't an athlete. This would have been one of the most embarrassing things that she could have ever done. So what she did is she had two logbooks. She had the real one, and she had the one she submitted, and she just didn't put everything on the second one to guarantee that she would lose. Handed that one in and kept the logbook. She had read over 200 books. She had completely slaughtered the whole competition. But it was recognized that, wow, for many people, throwing out the first pitch may be a motivator, might be one of those consequences that makes the behavior more likely. Not for Hannah. That was a horrible experience. She was embarrassed, she was shy about it, and she didn't want it. And it, interestingly, didn't keep her from reading because she's self-motivated for that, but it certainly changed her behavior in terms of what records she submitted for her teacher. So important to realize that what is a reward and what is a punishment depends on the individual. So in the course book, I go through kind of like what is behaviorism here, the ABC contingency theory, antecedents, behaviors, consequences, how those interact. And when we do behavior management, we manipulate the antecedents, or basically the circumstances leading up to the desired behavior, such as instructions and environment, and then consequences, which is the rewards and punishments. And those antecedents and consequences operate on the behavior, and that's where we get the term operant conditioning. Here's a little graphic there that talks about that. Concepts related to operant conditioning: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. Keeping in mind that reinforcement is the term, that's a consequence that leads to supporting or increasing the behavior. Positive or negative is not what does that. It's the reinforcement. So either one of those, both of them increase behavior. And then we have positive punishment, negative punishment, discriminative stimuli, schedules of reinforcement. These are all aspects. if you ever have a chance to take a class in behavior management or, whatever they call it, learning about all this stuff, it is, in all actuality, despite the will, despite when people want to change their behavior, they put themselves on behavior plans. There's almost no process of losing weight or getting in shape or anything. You go to the gym and they give you a little chart, and filling in the little boxes is reinforcing. And they sit there and go, yeah, you're doing great. That's a reinforcement. That all of this stuff is really, really the application of operant conditioning. Now, in terms of personality, of course, our environment selects the things about our personality that it's going to reward and the things about our personality that it's going to punish. And so we can see a little bit of a discussion on there, and then right into even the application into therapy, behavior therapy, where people set up their own behavior plans to bring about the kind of personality and behavior change that they want to create. Now, there's also reinforcements and punishments around us all the time that maintain our behavior right now. I mean, I love teaching, love it. The day they stop paying me is the day this goes black. Even, the screen will go black. And I'm not saying that this is all about money, but certainly that's what I chose as a profession. So I could maybe be excused for being somewhat, materialistic about it. But I think all of us, hopefully we find jobs that we love, so it doesn't feel like we're working, and it certainly doesn't feel like I'm working right now. But that reward is still part of what maintains that behavior. When I took on the gig from UMA, and it was, part of that negotiation was like, hey, I'd love to do this. I actually, they contacted me, and, the chair contacted me. I'll tell you a little story. Contacted me and said, do you know anyone? I said, yeah, I do. Me. And so I worked with her to develop this, and then the contract was offered. Said, is this enough? I'm like, yeah, that works for me. Great. But if they had said, hey, Mark, we want you to come down and teach, but a little short on cash here at UMA, so we want you to do it for free, I probably would have said no. Probably. Won't say definitely. There's a lot of rewards with this. And this is actually, to tell you the truth, this has been a very rewarding class. But those reinforcements and punishments, or potential punishments, I'm not gonna speed because I don't want to get a ticket, and those kinds of things. Avoiding punishment as well as gaining reinforcement shapes the person, how I act and how I behave. We go into our discussion and quiz here. The discussion, I want you to let's kind of open, fair, and supportive discussion about the use of positive and negative consequences with children. Now, I might be out of place here, but I'm actually a part of me is a result of corporal punishment. That I got the belt, I got punished, even physical punishment, but certainly timeouts and things taken away. And, those kinds of things that were a big part of my upbringing. I was a handful. And so I believe in those things too. I mean, certainly not in anger and escalating to the point of, abuse, and certainly, but the notion is that, are those valuable aspects of parenting? Now, keeping in mind that the theory of behavior management is that reinforcement for positive behaviors works way better than punishment for negative behaviors. But let's have a discussion about that. And I kind of open the door. If you feel that punishment is a good tool, tell us why. Because I'll probably agree with you, but not everybody needs to agree on this. And secondly, for the chapter quiz, I want you to think about some of the reinforcers like I talked about, or maybe what's reinforcing you about this class? What is the ultimate? I remember one time, and maybe I'll be another story here, but I remember one time I asked a student in my class, I don't really ask this question very much anymore, but why are you taking this class? And one person raised their hand, they said, I want a pool. And I'm like, okay, this is what I was looking for, because she made the connection. I take this class because it's part of my program. I get my program, I get my degree, get my license, get a new job, make more money, and I can buy a pool. And she just did this whole thing. It was very, very funny and very to the point of how almost everything we do, we can connect to a mechanism of reward. Other people were like, I like talking about this stuff. I like reading about this stuff. What are the various reinforcers that keep you going in this class? What are the various reinforcers that keep you going in other aspects of your life? So that's chapter 17. Let's go on to chapter 18, social learning theory. Speed things up a bit. Don't want these videos to be too long. We go into social learning theory, and we have this immediate thing, what are role models? What are the roles of video games, of people we watch, violence on television and whatnot, get into that. And then social learning itself, we get into Albert Bandura's model here. Really, this has a lot to do with looking glass self that we introduced earlier in the course, and our role models and the expectations of others for our behavior. So there's Albert Bandura himself. It's a shift from behaviorism. You can read up about that. You can read up about the famous Bobo doll study that he did. And this idea of reciprocal determinism, where according to Bandura, and I'm reading out of my course book here, behavior, personal factors, and environment are all equal determinants of each other. These things interact with each other. Environment impacts behavior. That's what we get from radical behaviorism. But the behavior also impacts the environment. So, personal circumstances change how we cognitively appraise a particular situation. So we see this mixture where the mind becomes involved. And our ability to understand social circumstances and move and act in a way to our advantage is an important part of development. So we get observational learning, where we pay attention, we retain that, we produce the behavior, there's the motivation process. We get into issues like self-regulation. This is actually really, really key. When I talk about what motivates you in this class, it's because essentially taking a class, aside from potentially the joy of learning and socializing and interacting with other people and the immediate rewards of taking a class, a lot of this has to do with delayed gratification. That I'm managing my behavior now because I have goals that are, and this is just a piece of a larger goal that I have of achievement or whatever. And that ability to self-regulate my behavior, to get up in the morning and say, really not feel like doing what I need to do, but then regulating my behavior and connecting it, making that connection to future goals and whatnot, how important that is. And then the concept, which I think is not talked about enough. We talk a lot about self-esteem, which is an evaluative component. It's essentially what I think. It's the net effect of our looking glass self as to whether I'm a worthy individual or not. And I have to tell you that that's really hard to deal with. If somebody's had a really, really rough upbringing and they've had all kinds of negative comments about themselves and they've internalized that, takes a while to get over that. It takes a lot of effort. However, there's this other concept that Bandura worked with called self-efficacy, and that's a person's ability to recognize their capacity to do something. It's basically their confidence level. That is something that we can directly assess. And then, if we go after let's say a person has low self-esteem, that might attribute to low self-efficacy. But if we can address the self-efficacy and show the product of that individual's behavior, success, as a counterpoint to the viewpoint of their looking glass self, we might be able to indirectly address self-esteem. But we can address self-efficacy. We can teach people the skills to do something, have them practice them, and have them demonstrate expertise. And so it's a really good way to get at low self-esteem by focusing our energies on producing what Bandura termed self-efficacy, or a confidence level. Now, social cognitive learning theory, we have Julian Rotter, who's a big part of that, the application of this in the clinical setting. And we get into, the view of our, we get into the behavioral potential, what is likelihood of a behavior occurring, the expectancy, reinforcement value, the psychological situation, all of that contributing to to basically getting the mind involved in evaluating all of these so a person has more confidence in leading to the behavior that they want to engage in. And I think the last piece here is this idea of locus of control. And again, one of those very interesting points for me to talk about, similar to looking glass self. Locus of control is a concept where do we perceive the outcome of our lives as primarily the result of our own efforts, good and bad, or primarily the results of external forces. And healthy psychology has revolved around a more internal locus of control that has the nature to self-blame for errors, even though they might be externally caused, but has a stronger value in potentiating our ability to say, okay, I made a mistake, I can do something about it, I can take the steps to make this change. If we feel something's out of our control and our failure is due to other forces, then there's nothing we can do and we can become helpless. And really that's a lot where depression can come from, and the ancillaries from what comes from depression. And so understanding our basic locus of control gives us an idea about how we approach success and failure. There's also an interesting kind of thing in psychology called the fundamental attribution error. And that is when we are evaluating success and failure, we tend, not everybody does this, but there's a tendency kind of documented that if we fail, we're more likely to attribute to external resources. And when we're successful, we're more likely to internal resources. If I failed, that's because the judge didn't like me. If I succeeded, it's because I practiced hard, that kind of thing. The other part of the fundamental attribution is there is we reverse that when we're talking about other people. When we see other people who are a success, particularly maybe people who beat us or something, we say, oh, the judge was favoring them. So external aspects of that. But when we see them fail, we say, you didn't study hard enough. We have those internal locus of control attributing internal factors to that person's failure. So an interesting trend in our humanity there, a little dark side of our humanity. So as we go into the assessments here, we have the Chapter 18 discussion, where we look at that reciprocal determinism, those sets of factors, that cognitive aspect of how we manage our lives. I want you to, can you think of situations in which your actions caused a noticeable change in other people? You had that impact on others and you're able to sense that, basically a social intelligence, part of our emotional intelligence, be able to assess those effects. And then 2 questions in our quiz, one on self-efficacy, and then I have you take the locus of control test and report out on them. Now, keeping in mind, there was a person who pointed out that the link in the course book doesn't work, and I placed the link inside the course. I think I might have put it in the chapter folder. If you can't find that link, send me an email and I'll send it out to you. It's a locus of control test that is in Psychology Today website. So that's it for week 14. And I hope you enjoy these things, and I look forward to these enlivened discussions. And I'll talk to you later.